Can we turn your mics on?
No, it's red. It's good.
It's good. Yep.
Okay. No, I'll introduce myself first. My name is Jason Peterson. I'm Director of Project Planning and Development for Kraus Anderson. I work closely with Tracy in the Bemidji office, literally all of our regional offices, primarily in our K-12 unit. I know you guys have had Gary Benson up here in the past with some health issues he's had. I've stepped in to try to get my head kind of wrapped around where things are at, where you've been, the direction that you're heading to. So hopefully we can get some clarification of that and try to figure out next steps moving forward.
Tracy Polk from Kraus Anderson.
I'm Kayla Johnson. I'm a school board member.
Craig Stevens, school board.
Yep.
Ian Hayes, school board member as well. Jerome Pack, school board.
Jen, are you able to put Matt that sent PowerPoint? Are you able to project that, or do you want me to?
I do have it, so if you'd like me to project it, I can do that. Matthew's here too, both of us from Elders. I can try.
Able to share your screen?
Let me give it a shot here. Usually it shows up when I click to share it. Let's see.
You do click those three bars.
Can you see that?
Yes, you can. Thank you.
Okay.
Just try to.
Bottom right there, right there. You use Zoom. Oh,
I think.
We have I think that's right. Yeah.
You have it in front of you.
I was just going to say my mute. Matt, it's feeding back in his car, so I'm just going to hit the mute.
Matthew may walk through this. I don't, is it, or did you want me to do that, Matthew?
He'll have to unmute himself now. I muted him. Sorry. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, can everybody hear me?
yes.
Okay, perfect. So, Jeff, do you want us just to run through some of our PowerPoint slides to start? Is that where we're going to start?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Jen, do you want to just flip through kind of as I go here?
Yes.
And yeah, and good afternoon, everybody. Matt Hammer from Elders. We're the district's financial advisor. Jen Chapman and myself are the advisors that have worked with the district most closely, and we've worked with the district for a long time. We have put some updated information together from what we would have been looking at last November. And I'm on my way to another district meeting, so I'm just going to go through, and as Jen kind of flips through the slides, if there's any questions as we go, let us know. But the first slide that we always like to start with is in regards to the district's tax base. And to no surprise, your district has a lot of seasonal rec tax base that has some seasonal rec and some ag tax base that has some impact on which type of levy the district utilizes, and we spent some time talking about this during the last election when we discussed specifically generating additional operating revenue or general fund revenue for the school district. The column on the far left is what gets assessed by the county each year, and your overall tax base is made up of about 28% residential homestead. Qualifying ag makes up about 25%, and seasonal rec makes up about not quite 28%. We're lucky enough in the state of Minnesota school districts to have two tax bases that levies get spread over. The column in the middle, there's only a few types of levies that are spread on that portion of the tax base. The district's operating referendum, local optional revenue, and equity revenue are the three taxes that are spread there. And then on the far right represents the different district's overall net tax capacity. And you'll notice that picks up all of the existing property. So if you just compare the two referendum market value and net tax capacity tax bases, you'll see right away that qualifying ag and seasonal rec property gets exempt for the most part from paying towards a referendum market value levy type of levy. And then on the far right, it picks up that portion of your tax base that makes up almost 50% of your overall tax base. Where this comes into play is when we look at the residential homeowner. The impact on the residential homeowner pay is about 56% of the levies that are spread on the referendum or RMV are picked up by the residential homeowner, and we shift to the right, only 25% of a net tax capacity levy is picked up by the residential homeowner. And we're going to see how this kind of plays out, again, just as a refresher as we look at generating additional revenue. And then there's a couple other things that as we look at a potential levy in November and trying to break the question down to a single question that we'll talk about as we move forward here as well. The next slide, Jen, so if we go to the next slide, this represents these are hot off the press final tax rates for 25. We picked up the districts around Lake of the Woods that touch the district just from a tax comparison perspective. If you had a $200,000 residential home, what would you pay for the school portion of your taxes, all school portion of your taxes, if you lived in any one of these school districts? So you can kind of see across the board, we have South Coochin Rainy River, we have Kelleher, we have Warroad, and we have Griglow listed here. From a tax perspective, you'd pay $560 in taxes payable 25 on a $200,000 home, where in South Cooch you'd pay about $415, in Kelleher $744, and then in Warroad's $829. And we can pick up some additional school districts here over the next few weeks. The counties are just finishing their final tax rates. So the list that we would have seen last year was a little larger than this, but we can update that as we move forward. The next slide represents your district's operating referendum allowance. When the original election was approved, that number would have been larger on the ballot, but since that time there's been a few law changes that have happened, one of which subtracted a portion of that voter-approved levy and made it shifted it over to the local optional revenue category of funding. There was no new revenue for the district at that time when that shift happened, but it did leave the district's voter-approved authority only at 24. So that contributes to about $10,000 of revenue each year for the school district. And the school district will be able to board renew that $10,000 if they so choose, starting July 1 of 25 to June 15th of 27. That's just an informational piece. I know we talked about that last time, that when the voters originally approved that operating referendum, it was a higher amount, and then there was a $300 subtraction that happened as part of the 2020 legislative session that shifted a portion of that levy over to the local optional formula. The next slide is an updated general education allowance chart. This just shows the general education formula over the last 2 decades. The orange represents the portion of the bar that is the general education allowance that makes up most of the funding that the school districts receive across the state from the what you refer to as the general education formula. So when you hear the legislators talk about increasing the formula by 2% or 1% or 4%, this is the formula that they're referring to. The blue bar represents if that formula would have just kept up with inflation over the last 2 decades, and you can see that differentiation, which is about $1,300, almost $1,350 per student. This is a chart that's been kind of widely used across the state over the last number of years when we start talking about the basic formula. The next chart represents, and this is just a refresher when we start talking about the different types of levies and we start talking about how you would generate additional revenue for the district's budget. Districts can present 2 questions to voters. The common one is that operating referendum that you guys have at a little over $24 per student. That's represented on the left. Operating referendum revenue really can be used broadly for any purpose. The question presents a per student amount where you ask voters to increase your annual general education revenue to support any general education expenditure. The column on the right represents what we refer to as a capital project levy, and it's becoming much more widely used by school districts across the state to generate additional revenue for operations. And it's really targeted to technology and other capital purchases that are happening in your general education budget or your general fund budget that can free up resources. So technology is the number one area that districts are utilizing this in. Transportation vehicles, buses, vans, those types of things are another very common area that districts are allocating revenue for. And then curriculum, textbooks, those types of things are another capital purchase that indirectly frees up revenue that would otherwise have to be spent in the district's operating budget to go towards a dedicated funding source to fund those types of acquisition and purchases. They're different, albeit the funding mechanism now is largely tax levy on an operating referendum. There used to be some state aid attributed with that. And in fact, for many years, right, that was a component of the operating levies that were marketed when districts would go out and ask voters for that revenue. Those equalizing factors were set in state statute and have been for quite some time, and they haven't adjusted, so the state aid attributed or the equalization revenue that districts receive largely is gone, and there's really only a few school districts, I can count a handful, that receive any state aid as part of that formula anymore. For most part, that revenue is coming through all local tax levy. The authority is a little different. It comes through a per pupil amount, like what was represented above on that 2424 for the operating referendum. And then a tax rate is communicated to voters in regards to a capital project levy, and we'll talk a little bit about how that functions in the upcoming slides. Inflationary factors versus change in tax base. So an operating referendum can get adjusted by the CPI. A capital project levy is going to adjust by tax base, so it's going to fluctuate based on your overall net tax capacity growth or decline, which is a difference, and it can be helpful for school districts to have that tax base being the factor, especially for districts that are in a declining enrollment situation where that revenue will fluctuate based on what your tax base is growing, not necessarily your student population. And then the other key factors, election dates, are more broadly open for a capital project levy. In both terms are the max of 10 years. So when we go to the next slide, and this really kind of articulates the difference in how we landed at the capital project levy and last year when we were talking about generating additional revenue. As you can see, the tax impact or tax implication, if we just pick a $200,000 home, the capital project levy is spread on net tax capacity, which picks up the entirety of the district's tax base. So the residential homeowner pays $77 a year for generating $400,000. versus generating that same 400,000 on an operating referendum increases that tax implication over 2 times. It's about 2.5 times. So that difference is about $112 annually. The reason for that, as you scroll down, is the ag portion of the tax base contributes towards the capital project levy, and more importantly, the seasonal rec portion of the district tax base contributes towards the capital project levy, where it does not towards an operating referendum. The other factor that, when we've been talking with Jeff, and we've used this strategy in a few districts, is you can actually combine a capital project levy and a bond question into the same ballot question, and they can be combined, and we have an illustration of that as we move forward. And it can simplify communications for communicating tax impacts, where we're not communicating 2 questions, we're just communicating a single tax impact on a ballot question. And we'll see how that kind of plays out as we move forward. The next slide that we have kind of represents this dynamic a little bit. And we're representing here, the gray represents the district's existing debt service levies that you're currently paying on for your existing voter-approved building bonds. The green bar represents a hypothetical capital project levy at a 10-year mark, 10-year term, and then the yellow or the white or bars represent a bond or a ballot question for a hypothetical $4 million bond issue in this case. We're spreading out those payments on the bond issue. You're getting that money up front to do the projects, and then those are repaid through debt service levies over a 12-year period is what we're showing in this case. We can manage the tax impact on the short end because those payments can be smaller on the front end, and then you can see on the back side of the schedule in calendar year or at tax years 36 and 37, those principal payments get a little larger. We'll see how this plays out a little bit when we start looking at changing that bond amount in the upcoming slides, because moving the bond amount between $2.5 million to $4 million to $5 million is really just the impact of how much more interest you have in the front end of the schedule, and you can adjust the back end of the payment schedule so it doesn't markedly move the tax impact, and we're going to see that when we see the tax impacts as we come in the coming slides. So Jen, as we go to the next slide, the next slide is just tax implications or tax impacts for 2 different bond amounts. This doesn't attribute, you can see the capital project levy amount is 0 in these 2 examples. But a $2.4 million bond, which pays for projects that we receive from KA at some level, at $200,000 home, that represents about $45 a year. When we increase that bond amount to $4 million, you can see that annual tax impact goes up by about $17 a year. And that really is that dynamic when we look at up at that slide previously, right, is we're extending the term 1 year. The interest cost goes a little bit up in the short end of the schedule, but it doesn't markedly move the tax impact because we can manage that by spreading projects that are financed through a school building bond over a period of time and manage the tax implication. So between 2.4 and 4 million, it's on a residential home of 200,000. We're looking at about a $17 difference between the tax impact. Below on those charts, you can see the agricultural impact in the seasonal tax or rec impact. On the ag homestead for the school building portion, on the school building bond portion of any levy, right, that's going to end up as a debt service levy. Those qualify for the ag to school credit. And the tax implication for ag homers is listed net of that here. So they contribute, for an ag property owner, you pay for 30% of that levy, and the state contributes 70% of that levy through state aid to the school district to make up the difference through the credit. That's That's an automatic credit. The property owners don't have to apply. It just automatically happens, and we're accounting for that in these estimates. When we go to the next slide, Jen, the next slide we start to contribute, or we start to look at adding tax impact of both types of levies into a single estimate. So this is moving the bond amount, but we're holding the capital project levy amount constant, right? So we're saying in this case we're going to generate $400,000 of annual revenue for the budget. That's going to fund technology, it's going to fund curriculum, it'll fund maybe some bus purchases on some years, but it's going to be an annual levy of $400,000 a year that the district will receive each year. We're also looking at different bond amounts between 2.4, 4 million, and 5 million. Those terms are moving a little bit. You can see the repayment terms, but that money would come up front to the school district. If the board approved it, you'd get that money up front in the either winter or spring of 26, and you could start funding projects as soon as the summer of 26 with that revenue. The tax impacts you can see, so it's at a $2.4 million bond amount plus a $400,000 annual capital project levy. On a $200,000 home, that's about $10 a month or about $120 a year. And you can see how those tax impact numbers move along the scale. On a home value, they move from $122 a year to $148, or about not quite $150 a year at a $5 million bond amount. So the next slide looks at a similar, but now we hold the bond amount the same, and we move that annual revenue amount around. So you'll see here, we're assuming a $4 million bond amount for about $4 million in projects that would be financed, that cash would come up front. Then we move the annual revenue for the capital project levy from $300,000, $400,000 to $500,000, just for illustration. And you can see what those numbers don't move a whole lot different from the amounts above. But as we move that annual revenue, or that annual $100,000 in levy in this situation, we're about $120 a year to $140 a year at $404 million to not quite $160 a year on an average residential home when we look at a $4.5 million capital project levy. The ag tax impacts, you can see how those are moving along. The capital project levy component doesn't qualify for the ag to school credit, so you can see how those numbers are a little bit higher when we start looking at the annual revenue. But you can, at the various levels, you can see what those impacts are on a per acre basis, depending on the amount of levy and the combination of levy that we're looking at. So we wanted to, in the next slide, we wanted to kind of show an illustration of how this would look in a single ballot question. We've used this a few times over the last number of years, especially when we start looking at a bond and a capital project levy in the same election. But we're using some similar language to what was used in a district most recently during their April election. In this ballot question, you can see how it articulates the purposes as the first portion of the question, and then it goes on to say we're going to provide funds through a portion of the funds through a voter-approved building bond, and then the other portion of the funding through an annual capital project levy that would generate so much revenue on an annual basis over a 10-year period. And then the tax levies would start with taxes payable 26. So this ballot, yep, go ahead.
Nope.
Did somebody have something
I think it was
that they were asking?
paper, sorry.
No, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, so what this would represent is it would look like the ballot question would read like this, depending on what the the district would want to put into the question. And then the tax impact would be represented by the slides previously, either the slide on those tax implications where you'd be communicating one tax impact for two purposes, and it would simplify the tax impact representation back to the public, because you'd only have one tax impact you were putting out to the public, and you wouldn't have two questions you were trying to articulate tax impacts for. It's not saying we have to do it this way. It's just an option for discussion. We could look at a two-question ballot still, where question one would prioritize the operating component of the question, and question two would be the building project, for example, like we did last year, or it could be vice versa. Most often, districts will prioritize the highest priority first. For most districts, that's getting operating revenue into their operating budget. And then one last thing I'll just say from a timing perspective. So right now, as you think about the district's budget, and we think about the operating revenue of that budget, this question would impact taxes payable 26 would be the first levy. So that revenue that the district would see, the taxpayers would pay that revenue through the levy if approved by voters with taxes paid in 26. And the first year of revenue for the school district for the operating component of this would be in fiscal 27. So the district right now can't impact fiscal 26 revenue with a vote. The soonest additional operating revenue can come for the general fund budget of the district would be in fiscal 27. The voter-approved school building bond, that would come through financing, and that would be available to the district as soon as next winter if it was approved by voters, to be able to utilize to fund projects in the construction fund as soon as the summer of 26. So I think on a high level, that's what we had just for content, for discussion, and we can answer any question folks have, and I'm sure Jason has some information to go over as well as part of his presentation. Jeff, did I miss anything, or?
No, I think you did a good job. Thank you.
Jen, is there anything that we wanted to point out that I missed?
I think we're good. I think, I think you touched base on everything. Yep, nothing else there.
Questions from anyone?
Yeah.
And I can keep this up for a minute too if you would like to see any of the slides again. I can go back to them if you'd like.
And we can hang on to, like,
You're still on the road?
yeah, I can just hang on. I'm going to be on the road, but if there's any questions that come up, Jen or I, as you kind of continue on, we'll just kind of stay on in the background if that works for you.
As long as you want to do that, we understand you have other commitments, so.
No, that's totally fine.
Alright, I'll stop.
I will ask one question. As far as the number of years on, the bonds or the levies or is that, how is that set? I mean, you got 11, well, I'm not on the presentation here. 10 to 14, basically.
Yeah.
Can those be modified and changed in length? And I think you touched base on it once, but I think I missed what you said.
Yeah, so an operating referendum or a capital project levy has a max of 10 years, and I would say that's the most common term that districts ask voters to approve, because it goes fairly fast, even at 10 years, right, by the time you get operating with that revenue. It doesn't have to be, it can be anywhere between that, right, 0 and 10 years, 1 and 10 years, but most commonly it's 10 years. On the voter-approved building bonds, the debt service component, when we look at where you're at with your existing commitments and where you're at from the standpoint in your existing debt service levies, it doesn't, right now, that term that we've been using at bond amounts of this length, right?
Yep.
You're not going to get any marketable change in tax impact by lengthening it beyond the terms that we listed. We're kind of picking the optimal terms to try to keep the interest costs down for voters, right, if it gets approved, and trying to manage those levies in the most effective way for property owners. If we shorten the term, right, it would come with an impact to a higher tax levy for the property owners. And if we lengthen them, it's not going to have any impact. We're just going to pay more interest, right? We're just going to extend that term at bond amounts of this term or this level. Now, if those bond amounts get bigger, right, like a voter-approved building bond can be a max of 30 years. I would say when you get to larger projects, the most common term is 20. But in your case, the project sizes don't really lend themselves to go much longer than 11 to 12 to 13 years, depending on the size of the bond and the amount of projects you're looking at. But that term, in regards to the voter-approved building bond, isn't communicated in any ballot. You're not locked into that. You're not locked into the term on the bond amount. You are locked into the term that you put on the ballot for the capital project levy or operating referendum.
Okay.
Those terms are decided and actually articulated in the ballot.
Anything else on the tax impact piece? All right, Matthew, Jen, thank you.
Sounds good. We'll hang on here.
I guess next step for us then is in that handout, there was a budget sheet and then a timeline schedule. Yep, that sheet. I'll just make one correction to it. I just noticed while we were talking here, that option 3 just pulled from the wrong cell. It's the $5,372,620 from the revised budget number on the bottom. That total in option 3, it pulled from the wrong cell. So that 5.3 is the correct number for that. Before we look at the projects, I maybe just had a couple questions for the board as it relates to the last bond or the last question that was out. Since it was out, has there been much or any communications with the board as to concerns they had with it? Why maybe it didn't pass? Was it the tax impact? Was it the projects? Just anything that you guys are maybe hearing in the community.
And I think we covered that kind of in detail at the last meeting when we were here, quite a bit.
Okay.
And
Couple bullet points that I remember was some information that was miscommunicated or misconstrued about athletic fields.
Yep.
Being part of an early discussion, but wasn't part of the vote or the ballot. So that was a problem.
Okay.
Two questions was the other one that I got.
Yeah, a little confusing
there
on
was two of them and just.
Sure.
yeah.
I would say also like clarity of what it's going towards. Obviously like timing wise with kind of what happened with the budget of the school and things there, and then it's like, is this just to like make up for something that like a mistake that happened, or like
Sure.
where is it going? I know from like our experience, like I know there was packets of like, here's the boiler and like things like that where maybe just like pushing that more of like, here's exactly what's
make a list and
happening.
it's condensed and it's
Yeah.
not to expect someone to look through a packet of 20 pages of all.
Right.
different-
Yeah, no, for
I
sure.
think just like clarity and understanding of that was also a big one. I think the timing was hard too, just with like things that had happened, and then is this just to like fix
Yeah.
something? You know, whereas like what happened doesn't have to do with like the roof getting old or the windows, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? So just like pushing that more of like this facility is just reaching its time
Yep.
to.
Yeah, I mean, you really have to, tell the
you
why,
know?
right? Why are you doing what you're doing?
Yeah.
Why are you asking for what you asked for? So being able to articulate that story is important.
I think that number needs to come over in option 3. It gets you to.
Yeah.
And then, you know, not as a board member previously, at the time back on November 5th, but, you know, so like this form in the left column, roof replacement, exterior masonry, window replacement, board replacement, walking surface, traffic flow. So you have these things. And I think what I've heard is a person might key into on floor replacement, you know, and then, you know, they're familiar with the school. They're like, yeah, well, our floor is kind of crappy, but it still works.
Yep.
You know, so why are we looking to spend all this money to replace the floor when, yep, it's chipped and broken, but is this a waste? You know, are we just wasting our money? So I just feel some of the feedback and my sentiment is the work that we're looking to do, I think we have to do a better job of prioritizing that needs to be due, you know, this project needs to be done,
Yep.
this specific thing, out of necessity, not out of convenience. And I think we just have to look at some of the things that we're looking to fix and really decide, does it need to be fixed
Sure.
tomorrow, so to speak.
And this is another question I have, and maybe you guys did talk about this last meeting, and I apologize if you did, but I mean, that's important. Is the consensus from the board that these are the right projects? And maybe they're, from your comment now, maybe those are up for discussion again as to what should be the project?
We didn't want to go into this as a new board of saying we're just going to go with what the old board said.
Yep.
And we wanted to make sure that we, for the community and for everybody that voted us in, that we're doing a good job of, this is what we have to do and not just go off of something that was just given to us.
Sure.
And I think the better answer, I bring that up, but I'm not suggesting that it doesn't need to be refixed
Yep.
or replaced, right? But I think what the community is requesting, and it's fair, is that they want to see if a buck is provided, they want to know exactly where a buck went.
Yep.
And I know, and I brought this up before, and he's just behind me, so maybe I can look at him through this. And the general thought is that, you know, these discussions were all had before, and there was a feeling that you know, there was a good job done by the board about expressing where this money would go to. Well, I'll say at the end of the day, I think there's still a lot of confusion, so we still have to address it. Yeah, and I mean, there's the list of items, and it's, you know, in the other packet, which we don't have here today, you know, is
These executive summary ones, or is that what you're? That's just what we use.
I think
that's what we use for information to try to build this.
Yeah, that's close to it.
Yeah.
I think they're all things that the school is in need of, you know.
Yep.
Wasn't a wish list, it was a
Yeah.
must-have.
I think the wish list was dwindled down to,
Yeah.
you know,
Yep.
to that.
Yeah.
So when you talk about not wanting to take on the projects that were just given to you and go, what is that in your mind, what does that process look like?
Well, I think we've done a lot of it is looking at it, making sure that we're doing the right things, doing the, doing what we need to do, like what Craig is saying, not just being like, well, here's what someone else decided.
Yeah.
Just go run with it without making sure that we understand exactly what's going on so that we can talk to it.
Yep.
Not just pushing the easy button.
Yeah.
Doing a little bit of legwork.
Yep.
And we talked about that at the last meeting a little bit too, and I think I shared a little bit with you, is that the voter expressed some interest, whether it was in a post-mortem survey or just the sentiment around the community, was that I didn't know if I voted for $1 in tax, what I was actually going to get. Kind of some specifics about that dollar, where
Sure.
that money went. So to me, and we talked about this at length, was a messaging problem. That message just needed to be clear, concise, elevator pitch, you got a few seconds to get it down, how are we gonna get there?
And I believe that the messages did go out and they were the right messages and all this other stuff, but there was some things that were said.
Well,
In
and these
different
specific
contexts,
numbers
yeah.
were not part of what was pushed out. And I think that, whether it's as to how much, I mean, these documents were all available and people could look at them, but they would have to spend some time.
Search.
Yeah.
And
So
it
was it-
needs to be like hitting them in the face, I think, so that they,
I don't remember the marketing material specifically, did that ever include the tax impact graph?
Yes.
One of them?
yeah,
It did.
but like the
Give you
mailers
the
and things that were out
$200,000
there,
house,
did you
yeah,
have
look at
any
it.
So
specific
the
numbers?
Ellers normal
Yep.
sheet, so that's good. At least you got,
Just from my own knowledge of, I wasn't on the board or anything, and had just been here like a year after moving back. Was there like is there like an interactive thing where you can enter what your house is and it like
Yeah.
gives you,
So,
so you're seeing like, on if it says my house is worth, $214,
Yeah.
$240,000. And just seeing that, like, is that all on
Yeah.
there?
Jen,
Okay.
Jen
We
or,
have a website on the school.
and then you had a tax
Yeah.
calculator.
Tax calculator.
Yeah. So you
Okay.
could type in
Yeah,
your
right.
parcel and it'll tell you exactly
Yep.
what your impact
Okay.
would be.
Yeah.
Yep.
it would be
I assume
interesting to
so,
see how
but-
many people actually did that.
Right.
And to me, that again goes to the messaging, is that, hey, did you know you can do this? Here's your average, but how do we drive them to that, is what it was. You do everything you can, but you can't force the horse to drink. You got them there, you gotta give them all of the information.
So part of that, and that's all great information. I think that's a big part of all of these. The first part is trying to understand that you have the right projects and that the tax impact is in line with what makes sense in the community. But then it's how do you get that information out and, you gotta tell the story as to why you're asking for the money. So I think that's a big part of it. If we were to look at these, and I'll just ask this question because in a bit we'll talk about the timeline. We're not like you have to rush it out, but if November 25 is the date that you want to go back out for this, the review and comment has to be sent in to the state of Minnesota by June 17th. So some decisions likely to have to be made at your next couple of board meetings that, one, these are the projects that we want to do. And if you look at the options, just in conversations with Jeff as we went through this, we did take the liberty, not from any, we can put them back in, we can take other things off. We looked at if you did everything that was in this executive summary the first time around on the bond side, that total, then we looked at what if that tax impact was too much, what if you took maybe the walking track or the walking services or the traffic flow pieces of it out. So there's still time to massage that a little bit if you think there's things that you want to reevaluate that maybe you do or don't want to do. But then that would be something that by, I think there's a board meeting May 19th, that some of those decisions likely would have to be made that, yes, this is the dollar amount and these are the scope of work in order to get the review and comment in time.
Yeah, and I think I think it's pretty clear that at that May meeting, right, we'll have to have that decision made then, right? And
Right.
so, I think we're aware of that. And the other parts, and I think I brought it up the last time, but I'll repeat it here again, is I think the community also wants to know, just like these are listed here, as far as these projects, roof
Yep.
replacement, exterior masonry, window replacement, flooring replacement, walking surface, traffic flow, and you go down to your technology and the levies. I think the community deserves, and we need to make sure we prioritize as far as this is the project number one we'd like to accomplish.
Yep.
And I talked about before about, to me, it's not super rocket science, it's from the top down. If we have roof issues, we need to protect the building from there, we need to protect the building from the outside, tuck point in.
Yeah.
Some of the areas outside the building, if you walk around the building right now, it's really it's actually amazing that the water hasn't gotten behind there and frozen and actually started cracking off more of the brick fascia.
Sure.
And so I think the community, rather than just have, here's the things we want to accomplish, I think they need to know the first project on the list that we're gonna take care of is this, is this. They
Yep.
know exactly what we're doing, and they kind of maybe can have a timeline, without specific dates, but
Yeah,
like you said, I think for the bond, in summer 2026, we'd probably be able to start.
yep. And I think, yeah,
Yeah. And I guess one of the question I had is, you have on here inflation, and you just kind of thing down the line, 10%. Is that since the last,
well,
is that on the last proposal?
yeah, when I talked to, I'm not sure what I talked to Widseth, Brent at Widseth, and we went through kind of what did they do for their facility assessment, trying to get some more information on how they came up with these numbers. But they had did actual cost that day numbers. And so what we typically are seeing right now is about 4% a year of inflation. So if this goes out from last year to this year to the projects in 26, I would say you're probably without the tariff, whatever that means today, what does that look like? And so I would say you're probably 8%. We put in 10 just because I know that it fluctuates, and every time you turn the news on, there's a tariff, there's not. But we're starting to see it already in steel and aluminum is starting to go up. So that 10% is what we would say if this was to pass in November and you were going to start doing those projects in 26 would cover what we can see today and what we're projecting out for that time frame.
There's some things I'd actually be afraid of.
And the-
No, and when we went through COVID, that number went from 4 to 5% to 25%. And so that's why we put it on there and showed the percentage. So if there was discussion around it and we wanted to increase that before the question went out,
Yeah.
I think we need to have that discussion.
I mean, it's, the increases affecting the tax base, and especially the bad taste in folks' mouth is when it comes to when it all falls on the backs of the folks who homestead here, who live here. And when the bad taste is when it's not affecting your rec land,
Yeah.
in your agricultural land, and people just feel cheated that live here, and I understand that. And so, there's certain things like that, it just gets that bad taste in the folks' mouth, and then you start to have almost blinders towards, okay, why are we talking about this again? It's just like,
Sure.
if we don't get something or pass something this year, then I don't think we're gonna wake up the year after and the roof's not gonna magically be replaced. These other projects are gonna be done, so if folks wanna wait 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, but we're gonna have to find ways to do these improvements.
The inflation is real though.
And-
You're right.
Yeah. But my thought is, we have the list here, and a lot of this project started with, a lot of, there's been a little bit of a changeover with, some of the board. But I think we talked about it before. I think the list looks decent. I don't think the building's needs have changed. But I think moving forward for us as a board, and less with maybe you guys, but I think what project we're looking to tackle first needs to be communicated directly to the community.
Like within these projects, how would we prioritize them?
Yeah.
Yep.
Would it be fair to say that most of the items in the bond side of things would be highest priority and the levy would be number 2s, or is that too generic?
And to answer that question, Jeff always has a pretty good memory. I'm going to ask you, when it came back to the referendum, when they didn't pass before, was the technology one, I would argue, lost compared to...
Years ago that failed?
No, last year.
Oh,
Yeah.
with the.
I'm just saying that the community ultimately had spoken, based on that survey, and if I recall, I think less people were favorable about the technology version of it than the building.
I have to look back, but
I
I
don't
mean,
recall that sounds.
they were both within maybe 10% of each other, don't you say? I mean, it wasn't like a,
Your spread.
no.
Yeah, But, and a lot of people, I think if they came in and voted no, they might have been voting no for both, but, so there's clearly some people who came and voted yes for one and no for technology, and that's what I recall it being. So,
There's an awful lot of no votes that could be attributed to lack of information. If somebody doesn't know, hasn't been informed, their typical answer is, I'm not gonna vote for a tax increase. I just don't know enough.
I think there was a lot of, I think I don't think it's fair to say that there wasn't a lot of communication. 'Cause I think, I mean, between the flyers, the newspaper articles, the Facebook posts, it felt like it was out there and communicated. But I think the communication needs to be tweaked so the community is better understanding about where that dollar is specifically to go to and what's it gonna go to first.
It's the car you're driving is the communication. The message, there's the people inside it. Like, what are you trying to tell people? We have to communicate that clear and concise,
Yeah.
exactly, so they know, what is my dollar getting?
It's like if I sat down and designed a dream house, I mean, it would probably be over budget. And I'd have to be like, okay, what am I, probably need to get rid of the quartz countertops and just have some formica,
Yeah.
Formica countertops. And the point is you gotta, is that from the 80s? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're still up, they still go.
Okay. See, I put them in.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess, I think that's a question that between now and May, I think we have to ask ourselves and look at this and decide if there is something. They're all projects that are needed, that's it.
Right. And I would assume that if they did a facility assessment, there was probably a lot of projects that didn't make this list. I would assume.
And that's,
It was over $7 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Projects.
And which is typical, is you,
Based on 4 in here, right?
Yep, we whittled
3.9
from
or
7
something.
down to
Yep.
4.
Yeah. So you cut 3 million right off the get-go.
well, your option, isn't that option 5 here? What is
that's
that?
the
Oh, no,
two
no, no.
combined,
That's
yeah.
the two
Okay.
combined.
That's
We
the
went,
left.
total was 8 million is what we went out to the voters.
Right.
Between the two.
So option.
And so
4
that's
is
gonna be
all-
another thing to talk about, is you're going back out for the same question, but you're 10%, it's more money for the exact same thing that you voted no for last November, or the last vote. So we just gotta be careful or not careful, but we just gotta be diligent on how we do that.
And like the capital projects levy, this is based on our total estimate for cost. The board doesn't have to say we're gonna cover all of our technology and transportation with the levy, but a portion of it, whatever it could be, instead of 400,000, could be 300,000.
Something.
Yeah.
Anything to give some
And there-
relief to the general fund, it doesn't have to be, because
Didn't we
it's
do that?
actually
Yeah.
closer to 500,000 a year between transportation and technology.
And on one of the tax impact sheets, they do have it broken down that way, that if you did the full 4 million of the bond, there's the options at 3, 4, and 500,000 per year, so you can see how that changes the tax impact.
So in a $200,000 house, I think he addressed that, right? We went from 300 at 119 up to 158, so for $40, that covered that 200 grand. So $4 a month, $3 a month.
But so there are a number of things to kind of consider here in the next month of how you want to move forward, if it's all of everything or parts or pieces of that stuff, so.
Well, yeah. In the levy that, and this is, when it comes to the transportation of buses, right? The thought goal there would be ideal to be purchasing 1 bus per year. In a perfect world, right?
Yep, and if you did the CPL for, let's say, 300,000, you don't have to dedicate 100,000 every year for a bus. You go every other year, you have other technology pieces that would go on a cycle. You just have that 300,000 to spend, on how you want to do that. But Ideally, a bus with the mileage we put on a bus a year would be ideal.
Yeah.
But it's not an absolute all, because we're not dealing with ideal situations, but
When was the last new bus that was purchased?
Showed up February of 2020.
February 2020? And is there another one in the works to purchase or no?
Not till
2027.
after next summer.
So, and total buses?
Are there 15?
But that we're utilizing. How many bus routes do we have?
6, 7.
7 bus routes, one, not a new bus since 5 years ago. The oldest bus is the one you're replacing, right? So if you went back and looked at how old that bus, I mean, that's a lot more than 7 probably.
And recently, the board was provided a list of all our buses, the years, and the mileage on them all.
Yeah, there's a
Dale
big chart for that.
produced it. So, and, yeah, the communication's gotta be concise to the community, but at the same time, like, pieces of information like that, I think are huge. Right? You know, if you go and just say, well, we need to purchase buses, you know,
You need to.
it's
what's
like,
your
well,
why?
do you?
What's your
I
story?
mean, yeah, what do you mean you need to purchase buses?
Right.
We were putting on about 250,000 miles a year in our fleet up till COVID, and since COVID hit, it's right around 200,000.
Well, and well, yeah.
We're still going the same 1 mile both directions, all 4 directions, just with fewer vehicles.
Sure. Because that information is good, like on a FAQ, even to keep that on the website of new questions that come up, or put the information out there that you want to, that, you know, how many miles do you put on?
Yep.
And you can answer those to get that information out.
Yep.
To your point before, if each one of these scope major topics were listed in the FAQ, why do we need roof replacement? Details.
Yep.
Exterior masonry, if we don't do something, we could, you know, whatever the story is, and we explain that verbatim, and they could see the dollar amount, it shouldn't, I mean, unless they're just totally against taxes.
Well, I mean, I think we all are, aren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't wanna pay it more either.
100%.
I'm so used to looking at it from a school's perspective, is that without a tax, there is no school. So you
Well,
can be
that's,
against it, but your kids lose.
that's what
So,
we're up against,
Yeah.
right? But, I mean, and there should be no blame placed there. I think that everyone's reluctant towards increases, you know,
Yeah.
taxes, and especially reluctant that they feel it's not necessary.
Yeah,
So we gotta do a better job or find a way
at create value.
to at least these projects, and I'm sure, like the original assessment or the wish list was, I mean, you could, find out a bunch more things to add on
Yeah.
here. Yeah, I mean, has the, you know, and that frequently asked questions, I think it's a really good, you know, thought is like the roof replacement is, I'm sure we've had our roof fixed over time, right? I'm sure it's been a few years, and one of them might be simply, you know, why do we need to replace our roof? I thought we just had repairs done on it, you know, during whatever, or in the same thing with exterior masonry.
And I don't think we're asking for a total roof replacement. I think
No,
it
just
identifies
repairs, yeah.
specific areas, and it's listed by numbers, and in the setting there's a diagram. So we're just looking to get the areas fixed on the roof that need to be fixed. So it's not a full roof replacement, because like I think the pool and the multi-purpose gym, that was probably the most recently redone roof, and that's probably 8 years ago.
I think about 5 years, would have been right around 2010, 11 that was replaced. What I'm asking for is another seal coat. They come in, put another layer on top, keep that warranty going.
Sure.
And
How,
so the,
go ahead.
like the exterior masonry, the question that comes to my mind without having knowledge is, you know, exterior masonry,
what is specifically you're looking to do to that? And why hasn't this been upkept for the last 35 years? Why do we need to do this now? That's a question I have, that the community has. And so they're thinking, well, now it costs more because we have to put extra money into it because we're not keeping it. So, the answer to that, I'm sure, I don't want to answer it incorrectly, but I'm sure that there's been, I know maintenance has gone through and had caulking and stuff here and there and has done, but we had never had, correct me if I'm wrong, we've never had a company come in and do it correctly, the entire building.
No, that's, all the expansion joints in the building, the
Yeah.
materials that was used back in the 90s, they're pretty much vacating the chassis.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and so in that frequently asked questions, if that could be articulated in there that, the life expectancy for the joints and efforts have been made to, repair them, however, it hasn't been done professionally because of, cost, I'm sure that is.
It's not a cheap option to bring somebody in and start doing that.
I think we need, it's only fair, we have to answer those questions that people have, like, window replacement. Why do we have to replace every single window? You can't tell me that every single window in the entire building is bad. These are the questions that we hear, that are asked, and it's like, okay, that's a good point. So, so when we have that assessment come in and look at the windows, well, my assumption is because if the window is not physically moving, like some of them are, like, within 3, 4, 5, 10 years, they will be.
Yes.
Right? And so we need to answer.
The windows that won't be replaced would be like
the big
pool,
ones.
the north and south of the commons. This is just the classroom windows.
Right.
And so it doesn't entail all of the windows. It's just the classroom portion of that is.
Sure.
Walking surface, outside the cement that's crumbling is it necessary? It's something I've been hearing is like, why are we going to tear it all up when, every single square foot isn't bad? Is there a different way to repair it at a lesser cost? And I think there are.
And that's where we can.
That was looked into.
Yeah, that's where we can help, because it's one of those things like when you remodel your house, you're trying to save this one little piece, and you got the whole house ripped apart, and you go, I'm gonna
Yeah.
spend more time dollying around this little piece than that piece is worth, and I could replace it now.
And so I think so when the community looks at this, and they say sidewalk replacement, these are the questions that we hear. I don't think we're doing a good enough job of answering it.
Right.
And providing them that full-on explanation.
Yeah, in layman's terms too.
Yeah.
Not some.
Here's the cost to come in and replace just, and to literally cut the edges out, and here's the cost to replace the whole thing.
Yeah.
I mean.
Why is it cost prohibitive to not do this, that story?
Did we have any FAQ things last time, or any resource to go to? I don't remember where that was at.
A little bit.
It's on the website.
On the website. Okay. You can enhance, polish, tweak, whatever words you want to use, but put it into real-time local data too.
I mean, the school moral story is I'll sit here and talk all day and night, but the projects haven't changed as far as the needs for the facility haven't changed. I think the community just wants these answers, and these are the questions that they have behind closed doors, and then you hear through the grapevine.
Right.
Yep.
So
If
can I
they're
ask
fair.
a loaded question then?
No. Yeah.
If the scope doesn't change, and we've got to add the inflation, and we come back out and we have a new tax impact, and we tell a perfect message, as best we think we can do to answer all the questions, does the board feel that the project scope will sell based on a proper message? Yes.
That exists here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my thought is, I think my personal thought is, I think we have to try.
Right.
Because the list, it has been dwindled down, and these are
Right.
necessary costs.
Understood, yeah. But
traffic
if
flow.
everybody's nodding heads, that we can get to that point where the school board is 100%, we're in, this is it, we know this will pass with 100% effort. Then we can put a message together and run and go. But if there's a tweak that needs to be made, we only have board meetings.
When you did a survey, did you do a survey last time before it went out?
Yeah, we talked about the last meeting. I think the survey that went out and the feedback from it, because we went over that, was quite accurate. And then you also talked about, or showed us an example, I think an example of another district that did a video, like a visual presentation. I think that would also still is a good idea
Roseau did it.
and would benefit us.
Yeah.
But do you know, in the survey, did they test, because I think I looked at the Donovan survey, they asked a lot about the questions, but I didn't see where they asked the tax tolerance question.
There was some with the comparison with the 5 million bond and with the football field, question on it.
They gave a tax impact for that.
They gave that, and that was
But
Okay.
that's a little bit of the problem.
Well, that's why that was.
Of the killer, would you support if? And when that's a little bit of it.
Because I think you see that a lot where the projects all make sense and everybody supports all the projects. And then you flash the tax impact out there and they say, wait a minute, I support a tax impact at 6 million. And then it's kind of the team's job to go back and re-engineer a project that's 6 million. And I was just curious if the feedback or in the survey, did it give you an item to say, hey, we'll support 5, 6, 8, 10, whatever the number is in projects, because they don't always line up. I mean, people might be in support of the projects, but don't want to pay what the
Did you
cost is.
get a definitive number from the past, was it Donovan Group?
I don't
No.
Did we ask for a max? I don't. Hold that?
Is there time to get something like that? No.
Well, we talked a little bit about that, is that the tolerance of the community of doing another survey was probably,
Yeah, it wasn't, it's not really there.
so, but for doing another survey, if I go back to when we did Roseau, when we got done with that survey, it was clear as mud. You could just see, all the yeses were a big number, the no's went up, and you could pinpoint what they would support. And it was 48 million, or whatever that number was. And there was a certain faction of folks that said, well, if we're asking for 48, let's just shoot for 52. No, the survey told you they will vote this down at 52. And that's the kind of concrete.
It's crazy accurate.
It's unbelievably accurate.
When they do that.
Jason's question is timely, but I just don't know how, to last meeting's question, we asked that a little bit about, if we could pull off another survey, would you support it? Nay, would you have to pay for it,
Yeah, I mean, as far as the list, the only one that always stands out to me and I question, if we were to look to have a conversation on one of the items would be the traffic flow.
And I think we did one without both of those.
Yeah.
The hard part is the tax impact is just so insignificant.
When you talk about if you add it in and not add it in.
Yeah, but then you switch your message around.
Thing is, the community doesn't, they're not looking at the tax impact and that's a little more. They're looking at traffic flow. We've been here for 35 years, we don't have this,
Yeah.
And I think if there's anything that that's a powerful message to say, hey, we listened, it didn't pass, we have adjusted something, then to turn around and go right back out with the same question and do it. If there is something, that helps in that messaging piece that,
Does that cover the interest or the inflation? Sorry.
the traffic flows $1 million.
937.
Goes.
But yeah, I think if November's the time, I think a survey is, I don't see how that would happen in time for a June.
Review.
Yeah, because they just moved that up a year ago where they took 2 months off of we used to have more time, now we don't, but nevertheless. So.
You can push the bond and that'd be questioned the following year, what is it?
Then you got another 4% on top of it just in juice or in inflation.
The reason we're pushing for November is because we have school board election,
Yeah,
so just for a cost.
The cost savings there.
yeah.
And it's a non-general,
Yeah,
you know,
Not something else attached to it.
great.
and correct me if I'm wrong, like, if they have to vote
Same
at a
person.
polling place, it's not going to be mail-in ballot.
Great, which is opposite of what happened in last one.
So once we move forward with the amount, and we're locked in there, if we were to we can't decrease the amount after the fact?
Well, once it's sent to
After?
Yeah.
review and comment,
Yeah, you can,
We can decrease.
because
it.
your question will be, and I think
You can't go.
Matthew's still on, you get approved for the authority to borrow up to an amount. If you change something in that.
Yeah, that's correct.
You can borrow, if you decided to do less. Yeah, so your authority is just up to 4 million. If you decide on the bond side, you want to do
Yeah.
3 million, you could borrow 3 million and it would.
Well, yeah, that's true. And like last time, and this, I think, caused some issues, is the athletic complex was part of the review and comment, right? And then we pulled it out and reduced the bond amount that the board called for the election, but it was in the review and comment, right? So we actually adjusted the authorized amount ahead of the election, because you don't have to call for the election until August 12th is the deadline. But you do have to have our review and comment in by the end of mid to end June to hit the deadline, so.
So I think that's probably the next step, is just as a board to say, we want the option 1 plus, or the option 4 with everything in. Are you gonna look at reducing the levy side, or are there any projects that you wanna take off that piece? And then once that decision's made, we'll put the review and comment together and get that submitted to MDE. And then, there's another sheet on here that's, kind of a rough timeline. There's a number of other things that have to happen as far as the notifications and things that you need, but probably the biggest one for us is just that June 17th review and comment. The May 19th, that just gives us time to get the information and do the review and comment. The formal resolution calling for the election. I don't know, and I left these in red, if there's going to be things we want to try to schedule as far as community meetings or presentations that go out, and it can be done to 5 people or 30 people. Just try to get that a consistent message out to everybody, and we can help lay that out or structure that or help put that presentation together. And then the publishing of the review and comment. And then once we get into next fall, probably that 3-month window before the election is when there's that heavy campaign for just information from the district, but then also if there's a vote yes group of some sort, and we can help facilitate those independently of one another, but try to keep it so the messaging's consistent from both sides of the table. So
That was one thing too we had talked about, like the vote yes stuff started in like September, really close to when.
And that's probably what we would do. I think if you
where
get,
it just like
there's
trickled to some people, like there were some pins, but like.
I think there's information will trickle out a bit, but if you do it too soon, then people lose interest by the time it's out. So it's kind of that, I don't know, it's that 10 to 12 weeks seems to be like the sweet spot to kind of hit it hard, whether it's a brochure that goes out to every household, and then different opportunities to get out to events and talk to people, kind of that consistent message thing.
Well, the school has to be careful, correct, Jeff?
Yes.
We just provide information. We
Information.
can't say vote yes.
No, for sure.
You can individually.
Can't even use your phone during the day.
Yes.
After school hours you can, but that's,
Right.
and that's why.
On the school's behalf, we can only just provide the information and the facts.
Yep.
Yeah.
But the yes
A
committee,
vote yes campaign has
Right.
to be by,
Someone else, so
Yep.
like last
By a
year, I
teacher.
wasn't part of anything,
Yep.
but like as I was a volleyball coach, so like came up and around
Yep.
as something,
Yeah.
and I just know it was like, oh, this is kind of close to like.
Yeah, And I think,
gather people,
yep.
like, as
And I
a
think you
community
start
member.
looking at that, of who's that group of people, who are the
Yep.
influential people in the town that might want to be part of that, and trying to get that group together and strategize. But I think it's just to manage them, they have to be independently, like you said, but the messaging has to be consistent with a little more oomph on the one side. But you want to make sure that what you're saying to everybody at the same time, or every time is the same.
Build a sandwich board,
Yeah.
put a table with all the materials
Yep.
out at every single event that's held in the gym. And every time there's an event, the coaches know, or the parent booster.
And like easy to
Super
easy to
easy.
digest materials too.
And
Yeah.
Anybody, it's the elevator
Yeah.
pitch, go back to it, any
Right.
volunteer in 5-minute discussion could answer enough
Yeah.
questions, and if they don't, direct them to the digital portion of it, the FAQs, so here's a QR code, scan it with your phone, you can do whatever we can to get that message out. If some people don't even know the vote,
Right.
it could be a yes sitting in their couch.
And that's the challenge in any difference, is the parents, to get the parents out to vote. It's always the smallest percentage of anybody who will show up is the,
I think I asked this at the last meeting without, so it's like forever ago, even though it's only a couple months ago.
Yeah.
What is the process for deciding where people can vote at?
There's only one for this election, and it's at the courthouse, at the government center.
Because it's
There
special.
are no other options.
It's done by
Okay.
resolution.
No other, so, and that's passed
That's,
Yeah.
that time. Okay. And I think I mentioned it.
Now there's, this is Matt, there's still absentee voting though, that's required by law.
So you can request an absentee
Yeah.
ballot, right?
and I think that's
And then you
September
could-
19th,
Yeah.
that can start.
That would be
You
more
have
by
to,
mail.
you have to request it though.
Right,
How many?
which is
By a certain
easy
date.
peasy.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a window there from, I think it starts September, I think is when it
Yeah.
But
starts.
just like the general election, we can only start so early, correct? And
Yeah.
campaign numbers, I mean, state law is July, where you can start
Or,
any political
Yeah.
signs, any, right, but for information going out and signage and that stuff, it can't start much earlier than September, right? Isn't it July?
You know what I mean?
Once we
I-
have it approved,
yeah, once we have it approved, we'll do stuff. We just don't typically. I guess I don't know if there's other things on campaigning for other things besides like a school bond. There may be other regulations to it, like if you're running for school board, there's probably
So most
different.
of it would start in August, would you say?
I would say, yeah, end of August, September, probably.
it's like if you're gonna have a Valentine's Day sale, you wouldn't start in November to promote it. You gotta get closer to that date.
That's
And
when
there-
I gotta start. It takes me that long to figure something out.
That's a whole different.
But I think it'll be important, and some of that messaging stuff too, like with the placard, the boards that go up at, whether it's entrances to the school or at different events. I mean, I think we can do those, like some of the questions about why or where are you doing the roof? I mean, you can illustrate that on a small drawing to say, hey, these are the portions of the roof that are bad. These roofs are X numbers a year old, and here's what we're gonna do.
Would it be too extra, like if at volleyball games, I know when they have the ITV room open for like sessions to talk about, would it be too much to say, hey, why don't I take you for a walk and show you
No,
exactly
for
what?
sure. Any of those
Because then it's like
Somebody knows
something
what
they
this-
can see,
Yep, yep.
you know?
And a lot of times when we do community meetings, we'd have them in the building that needed the work, and that was part of the meeting, was to do a tour. Take everybody around, show them the things that you're seeing every
The
day.
ones in red, we did that over in Roseville, and there was water everywhere in the basement, and it was just like, oh, that's perfect, let's show them all that.
And we did do a couple, but maybe we need to go about it different, because we didn't have a ton of people. I mean, yeah, we were here on the outside when
You gotta give them some reason to engage them to be there.
yeah,
Are boilers, heating, something
they were,
specifically mentioned on here, or is that?
It wasn't the wind stuff on it.
Yeah, okay.
So I think the next step before we get into election
Yeah.
strategies is you gotta nail down the scope.
The scope.
So I need questions from the board or requests for what additional information you need so we can whittle down what we have, or any cost savings, if there's some certain projects, traffic flow, I will have to look at what that all in 100. There might be And I don't know if we can look into, the biggest thing with the traffic flow, I think, for safety reason is the sidewalk on the north side where we're dropping kids off in the morning. And forego on the south side where the traffic dividers are, then maybe, you know, I don't know, maybe that's where your guys' expertise comes.
Yeah, we could look at that. Like I said, with the information we have, some of the stuff, I don't know exactly what is figured into that number either of what they have. So, I mean, I'm assuming they did some sort of traffic study when they came up with that, as far as parent drop-off, the bus drop-off, how all that works or flows. I would assume there's some thought process of what that change looks like with the number that they provided.
Yeah, we're taking a leap of faith that the WITSEF scope components are what they are.
And we've met with them, and it seems like everything is in line. It's just as far as what their thought process was to say, here's what you need to do to fix your traffic flow. Sure. Some of those things were taken for what they're giving us and going for that.
So to Jeff's point, then marching orders would be on between now and April 14th. Have a scope defined.
April what?
May 19th.
Okay, I was like, boy, we're close.
Actually, I'd like to have a discussion at the April 28th board meeting.
Okay.
So maybe by that time, you
The
can
regular
have
meeting?
questions and stuff.
Yep.
Why don't you tweak that, and if you went and yang too far and the numbers need to be, that something isn't on there, I would assume that others can.
Yeah, and I think us too, if there's questions that come up or scope or whatever it is, we can, and you're gonna have that discussion on the 28th, we can get you what you need by that 28th meeting, so.
Then you can hone in on the tax impact to the normal. If 200,000 is the number you're using for a normal home or an average,
I don't know what that.
what did you use?
I think that's what Matthew said is 200 was what they were
So
using.
200 is the deal, and you could kind of use that as a barometer. You know, are people going to support $119 a year? You got to reduce it to the ridiculous and divide it by 12 and say it's less than a cup of coffee a month.
And I think it's, the feedback I've gotten, to sum it up, I think it's less about the money and more about
What are
the
you doing?
trust and what we're doing with the money, and is it necessary?
Yeah.
I mean, as silly as it might seem, but that's the general consensus
Yep.
I have. It's not about doing the math. I don't see that that's necessarily the issue. I think it's just about the trust that these things are needed and that it's not just a wish list.
Yep.
And so there's a messaging thing that has to be
Yes, and if we can't get people to come here and walk around and look at them,
Yeah.
take pictures, do we
Yeah, well, I think
Are we
that
going to
video would be
just show
huge.
people, this is why?
Yeah.
Videos, photos, you know, whatever.
Commercial is taxed higher, correct? So I heard a little bit of that last time, just because commercial.
Businesses.
Otherwise, I agree with Craig, hearing complaints about physicality, those people's concerns.
So it's the messaging piece is what we gotta
Yeah.
figure out and tell that story, so.
Just selling the necessity of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Fine tune the number, get that out of the way, and then talk about the messaging ad nauseum. Make sure we got that crisp, clean, concise.
And then over time, it is going to cost more, but I don't know. People,
That could be part of the FAQ.
it,
If we
Yeah.
do nothing, what does that mean? Because that is an option.
We do nothing when
but-
it's doomsday.
Yeah, it's, to be clear, nothing, voting no isn't free.
Right.
And that's
It's a good message.
real. I mean, it's,
That
costs
could
are
be one
there.
of the emails you send out to the emails database.
and I doubt there's one voter out there, I doubt there's even one who thinks that we shouldn't do something.
Sure.
It's just a disagreement on what we should
Yeah.
be doing in the projects, and I think it comes down to an education thing, but
Yep.
the tough sell is, I would love it if we could fit all, 3,800 people in Lake Louise County in this room, so we can just, but you don't get a lot of folks coming here, so you have to rely on the mailing.
Yep.
And the other part too is there's that fine line, because, there was a lot of brochures and some of them were very concise, that showed up in the mailbox, but then you hear, well, the school was asking for all this money, why are they spending all this money on sending out these brochures? This is a waste. So,
That's not wrong.
no, that's, and it's like, because it was fancy cardstock, you know,
Yeah.
it's like, could we have, and, 68 cents or whatever it is for a stamp, and so when we're sending out the messaging, what message are we sending when we're,
Yep.
just spending thousands of dollars?
And this is, this is too soon for this conversation, but things like that, and maybe you did with Ed Minnesota. I don't know if they were involved in your last go around or not, but a lot of times they've got dollars available that sometimes covers that first mailer, and they'll work with your teachers union or whomever that might be. But there's some other pieces that we can bring in to try to, otherwise, like you said, you can't, the district either has to pay for it or the Vote Yes side has to raise money to fund those, because they are. If you're gonna put a flyer out in everybody's mailbox, that cost adds up, and so.
Yeah, yep.
I think if we're transparent and articulate what the.
Yep.
I think would be-
I think, and that's,
won't be an issue,
that's
because if you look
important,
at
is,
The county side, they just sent out property tax statements again. They're up anywhere from 24 to 48%.
Yeah,
They're not telling me a reason of any.
yeah, right.
So you get all these people that say, it's like, well, what changed in my
How come
property
how come the county
Yeah.
sent me on a fancy piece of paper?
Yeah.
And almost 50%.
Yep.
People are saying, well, this
But
makes
but
zero sense.
Mine went down. I mean, and I'm not talking about the school portion, I'm just talking.
Correct, but
in
there's no
total,
rhyme or
so I mean,
reason.
there's, exactly.
So to give that reason, I think
Sure.
is gonna bridge that gap.
All right. Well, yeah, let us know if there's any questions or anything we do between now and your 28th board meeting, and then if that's another discussion, and then that May 19th, if that's something we can shoot for to have a decision, or maybe you do it on the 28th, maybe everybody's on board and they say, this is what we're gonna do. We'll start working on the review and comment and getting that pulled together to send into MDE.
I think, if we came up with a decision by the 28th, unless we came forward with a glaring concern, push it out minutes to see if probably better go already.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just put the May one on there because I didn't know how this conversation would go today. I've been there, not, a lot of times, there's not, everybody on the board agrees that these are the projects that should happen, and that discussion starts over, so. It seems like you guys are all on the same page with the projects that are on the list, and that's a great step, so.
Yeah. I'm agreeable to the projects on the list. I just don't know if they're all gonna be agreeable to a yes vote.
Yeah.
And that's the balance.
Yep.
right?
And like, we looked at a couple scenarios, but we can certainly change that to whatever you decide
We
you
all
want
go
to do.
back and read that survey, and that answer might be in there. What will they support, I know we don't have a pool in there, but if we had a pool in there.
You're saying the one that was done already?
What's that?
This survey that was?
Correct.
Okay, yeah.
Just to refresh our minds.
Yeah.
If we go back in and we don't have a pool, but if we did, and it was glaring in that survey that said they will not support anything to do with aquatics, and we have one, there's our answer. So we could refresh our memory with that too.
Well,
All right.
we appreciate you guys coming.
Yeah, thank you.
And thanks for staying on the call the entire time.
It's an overachiever.
Just call.
Yeah, for sure.
Here?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
Gavin.
Thank you.
Yeah, you guys have a great night. Bye.
Call adjournment.
Yeah, we'll adjourn at 5:28,
Are we gonna?
and then
Oh.
we have to do another meeting, right?